AI ethics and research. My name is Jodie Heap. I am a scholarly communications and research support librarian, and I will be running through this session. What I will say, this is a brand new session. So it's the very first time I am delivering it. We'll see how that goes. The first half is a bit more presentation focused, and the latter half, I will start to ask you some questions and ask you to type or reply out loud if you are confident to do so. So just a warning in advance so we can prepare ourselves for that. And if you have any thoughts, feedback, comments, please do let me know. Like I say, this is a brand new session, so I'll be interested to see what you all think about it. Okay, so for this session, the objectives is to, oh, can I just get whoever, if anyone isn't muted, just to mute themselves, that would be appreciated, thank you. So learning objectives for this session are to identify ethical considerations when using AI in research specifically. We're going to have a think about and recognise the risks of bias, data misuse and misinformation, which can occur. We're going to have a look at applying best practices for transparency and attribution, and we're going to explore the emerging policies and guidance on AI use in academia. Yeah, let's get into it. Why does this matter? Why does AI ethics matter in research? Great question. That was my starting point for exploring this question, this topic. And essentially, AI tools are becoming increasingly embedded in searching, reading, writing, coding, and analysing research. They are becoming more and more ubiquitous with an experience that a researcher will go through. Their tools are prolific, and we want to use things that make our lives easier, so why wouldn't we? But of course, we need to consider the ethical considerations of this. What are the integrity issues? How can we engage with them, not just technically, have the capacity to engage with them, but also what are the correct ethical routes that we can navigate through using these tools responsibly. Researchers are responsible for ensuring that research remains both transparent, reproducible, and ethically sound. So we have these responsibilities as part of being researchers, that we need to traverse the landscape of AI and research as it's never been before to figure out what is the correct path forward. There's not necessarily a guidebook that can tell us the correct answers. Some of this is around talking to our peers, talking to others, looking to others for guidance and seeing how we can set that path for ourselves. It's a really interesting moment in time, I think. Just to clarify, what do I mean when I talk about AI tools? Well, some of the common tools that might be used by our researchers is things around generative AI. So generative text, code, or images are all common things that typically are used by researchers to support their research. Some people love to use them, some people do not like to use them, and some people are just starting to dip a toe, dabble a little bit. From a librarian perspective, the next one is sort of my bread and butter, the thing that I am really trying to get to grips with, and that's AI-powered literature discovery tools. People want access to information that is relevant to them, and how we search and how we engage with the computer programs that return our information products to us is changing, and that's a really interesting moment that we have to get through. People are introducing these products. Some of them are free, some of them are freemium, some of them are paid for, and it's an interesting point where we discuss that equality versus equity point in time where, particularly from a library perspective, how do we engage with these tools that are enabling people access to information? So that's just, my personal interest into all of that specifically. And of course, we've got things like automated transcription, translation, or summarization software, particularly around literature. People love a summary, a simple text, clean English summary, very helpful. Or is it? It's a great question. So essentially these tools process information but do not understand the context in which they sit, the ethical implications, or the disciplinary norms that may exist. So they are computer programs. They are just trying to do what they were programmed to do. Whether they achieve it, that's still to be seen, I would say. So, of course, just a warning and note about these information systems. They are providing us with some information, but they are definitely not fully intelligent, and they are simply trying to predict patterns based on their training data, and they do not evaluate truth, quality, or appropriateness. And the risks for researchers include fabricated or biased outputs, loss of nuance in these complex arguments in which we are trying to engage in, and then over reliance on seemingly confident answers. Gotta love it when an AI comes back at you with a really confident answer that you know is incorrect. Just have a good old argument with an AI system. It's a bit like arguing with a plant or something. But here we go. Excuse me. So when we think about ethics and we think about researchers, there's sort of a few core elements that come up time and time again. That is integrity, the honesty that we present, how we have, methodologically approached something, how we've analysed it, how we are reporting that information. Are we being, integral in our behaviours, in how we have approached our research project? Do we have accountability? Are we remaining responsible for the works that we are outputting and submitting and sharing with the world? Are we transparent? Are we providing clarity about the tools and methods used? And do we have respect for our participants, our data subjects, and intellectual property? These core principles for me really centre the ethical nature of research. Am I confident in talking to others about what I did, how I did it, why I did it that way, and can I share that information, and can that be reproduced perhaps? Love a little bit of reproducibility. Talk to me about open research practices. And where the crossover kind of kicks in with the AI elements are in areas such as literature reviews, getting those AI generated summaries, maybe looking for some gap identification. We're always looking for that gap in the research, but it's not necessarily a giant hole. It's about understanding how different conversations mesh together, or is there a conversation that is not happening? So it is being quite popular at the moment for AI tools to be used for literature reviews. Again, my opinion is a bit jury's out on whether this is a viable or non-viable avenue to explore, which is kind of the whole conversation of this session of, I don't have the answers, but I am interested in the conversation, so let's have them. Drafting text, looking at, supporting the writing of the background, the methods, the discussion, how do we feel about an AI tool stepping in to refine grammar, structure? It's quite a common one, really, that sort of sentence clarity is being used for. Data analysis and coding assistance, again, quite helpful in, if the program is designed to recognise patterns and we're looking for patterns in our coding, then perhaps it is a viable route, or perhaps it isn't. You guys tell me. And then the last one sort of ties into the drafting text, which is around editing and language refinement. English is one of the most predominant written languages that we use to get published in, but it's not everyone's first language. And how do we feel about AI supporting that translation? Yeah, good questions. So that is literally the first question of this session. So in the chat, I would appreciate it if you just have a look and let me know, of these four options: literature reviews, data analysis, drafting text, editing, and language refinement, which of these feels more low risk, and which of them feels more ethically sensitive? I'll just give you about 3 minutes to 1/4 past to have a think about that and just drop some general thoughts into the chat. So we've got a few coming through now. Bit of conversation, maybe literature review, high risk. Kelly says data analysis feels higher risk. Also, fear of putting data into an unknown place. Yeah. Data analysis and coding could be useful. Yeah, certainly could be useful. Yeah, Gareth, they are all high risk if the researcher does not keep ownership of their work, I feel. Yeah. So a little bit more conversation around maybe the data analysis side of things. Yeah, unsure of the ethics and sharing transcripts of interviews. Yeah. Editing and language refinement, more low risk as long as it's used to support and not just relied on. Yeah. Yeah, but sense checking the results. This is it. We can't fully trust the AI systems. They're useful. But then is it useful if you have to go back through and double check everything? Yeah, a lot of conversations around that at the moment. Yeah, absolutely. You run the risk of producing what the AI wants, not what you want. Yeah, the bias in the training data. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, there's still a few more coming through, so do continue the conversation in the chat. But I'm just aware that I've got a lot of slides and only the hour, and I'm going to really try and stick to time. So, and tell me if I go off on a tangent and get distracted. Okay, excellent. I agree. I think some of them are slightly more ethically high risk, some of them are slightly more ethically low risk. It depends on the situation, on the context, on the type of information that I have. Again, I don't have the answer to the question, but I am interested in how we're all talking about it. So, a couple of things to note when we talk about authorship. AI tools cannot be listed as an author and they cannot take responsibility for any research claims. So ultimately, again, it centers around who is taking responsibility for the output that is being produced. Do we take ownership of that information? So whether a tool was used or not, at the end of the day, that's our name against that research. Do we back it? Do we fully say, yeah, I take ownership of that work, regardless of how it was produced? Um, Ethical risks really do center around on the use of AI, but not acknowledging it. Okay. So I think when we consider our sort of risk calculations, our risk analysis, we want to be identifying when and how AI has been used, so that we can acknowledge that within the works that we are producing, so that the reader has the awareness that that work was in some way produced with the support of an AI tool, even though the work is being fully owned by that researcher. It's useful in that transparency conversation to acknowledge that AI tool. Um, and it becomes difficult when you are using your own working and you have these softwares that are designed to become used to you, aligned to your preferences, aligned to your writing styles. It can be ethically confusing if there is a blurring between what you specifically wrote and how much assistance you had in producing that piece of work. So my recommendations for good practice include, of course, following institutional and publisher guidance. Keel has guidance on how to engage with AI and AI tools. And if you are seeking to get published, publishers are now releasing specific guidance on how they expect you to present or engage in AI tools. And specifically, this question that kind of arises from that is, how did you use that tool? Not just did you, but specifically, how did you approach it? So as mentioned in the chat, and I can see there's still that conversation going on, which is great. There are issues, particularly around data and sharing data into these unknown systems. So most of these are private products with hazy at best clarification on how they will use the content that is ingested, that you copy and paste into them. So things that we need to consider is, where is this data stored? Okay, where does it go when we put it in? Is it sensitive, personal, or unpublished data that is being uploaded? You know, is it ready to go public? Because it might. And do the terms of service of that product enable you to use the outputs that are generated? And do you enable them to reuse your material in their training outputs? So there's a bit of a legal issue there where, yes, you can use that product, but there might be a clause in this tiny subprint that says that they can take all of your data and do what they like with it. And oh, by the way, you can't do anything with the output that they have shared with you in a publication scenario. So I think it's really going to be interesting over the next couple of years, particularly from a institutional library perspective, where we start to have perhaps agreements with particular types of AI tools, where we consider how we can use safely these, you know, products. You know, we've got Copilot here at Keel, and that will have had some super fine print. I'm sure they've gone through all of that. But you know, it is interesting. And of course, you know, it's particularly important that we consider the sensitivity around anything that has human participant data involved in it. And then if there's anything that might be commercially sensitive, or if it's embargoed for any particular reason, again, we've got to be considering how we can safely use these tools without, you know, scuppering ourselves and all of our sensitive data. And again, touched on in the comments, which I was really pleased to see, which is that basically AI systems are biased. They have all the same biases that society at wide has, and magnifies them. And you know, humans are not perfect, and so the systems that they create are not perfect. And this is definitely a reflection held up to us in a mirror via these AI tools. So there are historical biases in the training data. There are dominant languages, disciplines, and perspectives, and those are going to come to the front when we use these AI systems. And of course, the implications for that when we are using them from a researcher perspective is that we might accidentally reinforce exclusion or marginalisation, and we might also lean into skewed literature or methodological assumptions. Just because something has a lot of data and research on it doesn't mean that it's good today, but because of that weighting of its predominance, it might lead us into, you know, avenues that we were not expecting had we not engaged with that system. So definitely bias is a big issue in the data systems. So as a result of using these systems, there is this increasing expectation for the declaration of AI use in theses, publications, and assessments. And we want to be describing really clearly how these tools and the sort of intention, the purpose of using that tool really clearly, so that the reader can understand what has been touched by the AI. This transparency, supports wider reproducibility, which is a thing that we are really keen on here at Keele. We want to encourage trust in our findings from our peers and from the wider public, and we want a fair assessment of your work, not just what the AI produced. So, a couple of questions. Let me just grab my Word document to paste those into the chat. Okay, so we've got 3 little case studies here that I would like you to consider. And the questions that I'm asking in the sort of ethical grey zones that I've presented is this acceptable? What conditions would make it acceptable? And what would you disclose? And again, I'm going to have about 3 minutes or so per case study. So for case study 1, we've got a literature review acceleration using AI to summarize 50 papers before reading them. Is that acceptable? What do you guys think? Okay, so Kelly says maybe to give you a feel of the papers before going in and like fully reading them potentially. We've got a not acceptable. We've got an acceptable, helps narrow down the paper selection to weed out non-useful papers, but need to be aware of missing papers and read around the issue 2. Check nothing has been missed. Okay. And afterwards, you think it's acceptable? Yeah. Yep, so we're talking about efficiency here. So as long as we're reading it, we can decide what to read in more in depth. We've got it depends. AI gets a lot of things wrong. Yeah. 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 Is it better to read the abstract and then summarize the full paper, maybe? So a lot of people seeming to lean towards it's okay as an initial scan through, but then yeah, it's really important to go through and read the paper so you can make your own decision. Yeah. Yeah, so again, kind of an interesting point there, Karina, which is, how good are our prompts into the system, perhaps, and how much does that direct the outcome of the AI tool? One of the things that I think is really interesting from a librarian perspective is that even if we put in the exact same prompts, how we've engaged with that tool or just the different seconds of the day, we will get completely different answers, even if it's based on the same information, which is a real quandary for an information professional, because when I go to a search system, I want to get out the same answers, the same number of results every time, which is why systematic reviews are so interesting. So yeah, I think the consideration of the prompt is quite pertinent there. So yeah, nice. Okay, so next case study is for coding assistance, generating statistical code without fully understanding it. And again, do we think that is acceptable? What conditions might make it acceptable, and what would you disclose? think this one may be a bit more contentious, just in my opinion. So we've got coding consistency is okay to use, but needs to verify that the reader, oh, too quick. Oh, I've lost it. But yeah, coding systems used in this further read other sources to be sure it may not be accurate at all times, not acceptable if it's analysing data and you don't understand the process. How do you know if it's been done correctly? Yeah. Depends on the data being inputted. If it's sensitive or personal, then no, because of the potential for storage and reuse. Generate general numbers, in my opinion, should be fine as long as you understand the maths being used. I wouldn't be comfortable putting my data into an unknown system, particularly if it is sensitive data. Feel like coding using AI could definitely introduce bias too. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I kind of that's my kind of thoughts is that I I feel like I can see that, when we're looking at like editing text, for example, I can kind of see where what I wrote and what version it came up with. I'm a little less confident in my coding skills, so I probably wouldn't use a tool if I am not fully confident of being able to replicate what it did for me. But yeah, it's an interesting conversation because coding is something people struggle with and people want that support, you know? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Third one is editing versus writing. AI heavily restructures a discussion section. Is that acceptable? What conditions might make it acceptable? And what would you disclose? Yeah, it's straight in there, Lisa. Nope, not your work. Yeah. Okay, we all seem to be on the same level with this one. It's not not acceptable. So, if it's making major changes, we can't take that on as our own. Okay, well, perfect. Okay, thank you guys. We're going to move into some slightly more juicy questions, shall we say, now that we've warmed up a little bit with these. And again, I would love it if anyone is willing to come off their mute and speak about it, but totally understand if that's something that you're comfortable with. So happy to continue in the chat. But here is another situation for you. And it's a multilingual researcher writes in their strongest language and then uses AI to translate the manuscript into English. Is this comparable to professional editing? Could the meaning be subtly shifted by the use of that translation tool? Should it be disclosed? And does it enhance equity in publishing? Okay, so again, I'm going to give us about 3 to 4 minutes just to have a think about that and start thinking about answering it. There's no right or wrong answers here, it's just an ethical quandary. We've got maybe it should be disclosed. Yeah, I do not think it's comparable as I can get it wrong, like Google Translate can also replace words and say it differently. Yeah, translations can easily lose their meaning. Yeah, so again, that sort of trend of it's not equivalent to professional translation. Got an acceptable, it would want a person to check it. So again, maybe using the tool, but then asking someone else to just check that the translation has been true. That's an interesting point of view. Yeah, better to disclose it. One thing I do think, like I mentioned earlier, because of this predilection we have towards having to publish in English, there's a real issue of equity in the wider world of our non-English, non-native English speakers. And, you know, is it a chance for us to become more equitable in helping us communicate with ourselves? It's an interesting one. Yeah. Okay, so generally some sort of inclination that it's not a full translation service, but it could perhaps be used to sort of act as a jumping off point to support a translation that is taking place. Okay, excellent. I mean, that's a really good question, Gareth. Would disclosing it make the researcher feel that they are being discriminated against? Perhaps. I again, we would love to say we live in this ideological world where everyone is treated fairly and we have, no biases or discriminations, but we clearly do. And how do we approach them? How do we discuss them? What is the best path forward? It's really complex, and I feel like the addition of the AI into that conversation really brings up some of the icky feelings that we might have about trying to make an assessment around what is the correct path forward. Just give Lisa a second before moving on to the next one.